Rightio. I think let's get started. So hello everyone and welcome to this second talk of this year's LILA Trailblazer program. Our topic today is the fundamentals, different routes to being a London lawyer. And as a true lawyer, I'm going to start by immediately caveating that with most, if not, well, many, if not most of our panel today have worked at some point outside of London, and one currently does. But they've all got in common is that they have fascinating career stories to share with you. So more on that later. But first of all, I'm just going to do a little bit of housekeeping, which is to say that talk is going to be 1 hour long. So it should finish up at 5. It is being recorded, so just bear that in mind, and it will be made available afterwards, along with the other LILA talks in this program. If you have any questions, we'd love to hear about them. There's a Q&A at the bottom, so just pop them in there and I'll try and keep an eye out and ask them either as we go or at the end, depending on how many questions we have. Also, there's a chat function, so if you have any feedback at the end, just pop it in there. That would be really helpful for us because this is the first year of the Trailblazer program, so we're always looking to improve. That's it. That's the admin. Let's get to the interesting stuff. Hi, I'm Evan. I'm originally from Belfast, and I came over to England for university about over 10 years ago now. That's terrifying. And never left, basically. And now I work in London as a solicitor for Paramount Pictures. And I am just here really to facilitate today and to introduce you to the rest of our lovely, interesting panel who've kindly agreed to speak to you about their journeys. So very briefly, I'm going to tell you who they all are as best I can. So first up, we've got Kerri McGuigan. She's originally from County Monaghan, and she now works at a law firm specialising in white-collar crime. And a large part of her job at the minute is trying to stop a super yacht from sinking. Interesting. Will, meanwhile, is from sunny Bangor in County Down, and he moved to London in the summer of 2011. And he also works in white-collar crime, but as a barrister, which is a slightly different role. So we might hear a bit about the differences between Kerri's work as a solicitor and Will's work as a barrister. Thirdly, we've got Úna, and she is from Ardbow in Tyrone. She's a solicitor apprentice at Kingsley Napley, an international firm that's based in London, and she currently works in the criminal litigation team. Next up, we've got Ross, who's from Dublin, where he studied history and political science at Trinity, and he has worked in the disputes and investigation group at Slaughter and May since July 2019. We've got Carrie as well here. She started out at the Mercedes-AMG Petronas, I hope I said that right, Formula One team, about 10 years ago, and she's been there ever since, working her way up to being motorsport legal director. And last but not least, we have Shane, who planned to study in Dublin, I think, but ended up in London studying chemistry and then training as a solicitor. And he now works at a Norwegian 3D manufacturer of components for aerospace, defense, and the industrial sectors. I think that's right.
That's right.
As you can tell, very, very varied careers here already. Let's dive in. Shall we start with Shane? I have given a flavour of what your career has involved. Maybe can you talk us through it. When you left school, what happened?
Perhaps I shouldn't say how long I did school or that I did Leaving Cert in 1991, so you can do the maths for yourself. But yeah, so I'm originally from a small town in North Kilkenny. Planned to go to UCD to study science. I was a bit on the young side to go to UCD, so I spent a year out working in a bar illegally, as it happens, and playing a lot of rugby. But in the interim, I applied to UCL to study chemistry, and I was accepted. So I spent a lot of time there, both during my degree and in postgraduate. And I was doing research into self-cleaning glass, and a part of that was doing a review of the patent material. So that was my hook into law. So I was like, oh, this is quite interesting. So after a bit of research, I decided to do the postgraduate diploma in law, which is like a 3-year law degree in 1 year. I did that in Store Street in London at the College of Law, and then from there I did the LPC, which is mandatory for everyone, regardless of whether or not you've done a law degree or not.
And it's more sort of academic study, isn't it? It's like another year of studying.
Yeah, it's meant to be the practicalities of doing law, but I guarantee you that I didn't use one single bit of the LPC. Maybe accounts is the only probably useful thing, and a bit of tax stuff, but that's about it. But the LPC is changing an awful lot since I did it. It's become more bespoke according to the firms that you will eventually go to. I didn't have a training contract, so before I started the LPC, it's typical in the UK for lots of people to have a training contract, and the firms may or may not provide the cost of tuition of the LPC or the conversion course, or both. I then, so it was a bit of a leap of faith from my perspective, because going into a job, starting a new career, change of career for me, from being a research chemist into law was a bit of a leap into the unknown. But I persevered, and I got a training contract at Freshfields after a stint as a paralegal there. And a paralegal was a great kind of way to settle in and prove to Freshfields and to other law firms I was committed to a career in law, because that's one of the feedback that I got, because I changed. And Freshfields is great because 50% of the intake out of 100 were non-law. So there's people from very diverse backgrounds, and I even met senior associates who were ex-bricklayers. So that'll tell you about the diversity at what is supposedly a blue collar firm. Now, Freshfields is, I sat in. It's an international firm, and I got to sit in a variety of seats, predominantly corporate and competition law. I was told I'd be doing IP, but I kind of got swayed into competition law, where I qualified into our Brussels office, where I advised clients primarily in aviation and ancillary sectors in both merger control, so big cases that go to the European Commission or what was then the OFT, now in the UK. And from there, I was headhunted by Emirates Airline in Dubai, where I spent a number of years. And from there, my career kind of changed, because competition law was quite specialised. But once I was at Emirates, yes, they were involved or accused of being involved in a worldwide cartel to fix prices on fuel surcharges. But it's very commercial. So that was my first exposure into the commercial world. So I've worked for a number of companies in the tech sector, such as Fujitsu, and now I'm at Norsk Titanium. Even though I'm based in London, I advise the business in upstate New York and Norway, even though I'm fully remote. So the deal is I get to fly, which sounds glamorous, but it's not as glamorous as it sounds. So yeah, that's my potted career history to date.
And I think what's interesting to me about that is that you have constantly evolved throughout it. You've done so many different things. And I feel like that's quite useful, to hear about, that you can start out thinking one thing might be interesting to you, and then gradually you learn that something else is, and then you keep changing as you go.
It's funny because you have to adapt. I mean, I was told from day one by the head of graduate recruitment at Freshfields I would be sitting with a certain IP partner. Yeah. But it just happened that you have to do a corporate seat, and then I actually, because of my paralegal experience, I knew some of the guys in dispute resolution. That was the competition part of dispute resolution. So, and the work was really interesting. We're involved in advising clients to defend them against allegations of collusion and participation in these cartels. So it was really kind of interesting, and you get a feel for it. And I kind of got it influenced the rest of my career. But competition law is so specialized. And when, you know, someone like Emirates comes knocking, it was a real wrench for me to leave Freshfields because I loved it. But I thought, you know, down the line, where do I want to be in 20 years time or whatever? And I thought, well, I want to be in-house because you become much more strategic. So you have to evolve. I mean, even though ostensibly I'm a competition lawyer, it's all about managing risk. That's what I'm sure the people who are in-house will agree that it's about managing risk and advising the business accordingly. So you kind of, yes, I do get to, you know, get to do negotiations, and I love that. But you know, it's as I said, it's about advising the business, and sometimes you have to push back. But in terms of the evolution, I think you're expected to do that in your career anyway. Otherwise, you just stagnate. And I think the biggest change for me was to change from chemistry to law. Was I hadn't written anything substantive apart from academic papers for a long time. So you have to actually, so the drafting, you know, it's very important to have those essential drafting skills. Yeah,
isn't it? And I think that's just for a bit of explanation. A training contract is one of the routes to qualify as a solicitor, and it's after I know we talked about doing the kind of conversion course, and then the LPC, the legal practice course, the studying, and then the training contract is a 2-year practical work experience. So it's usually provided by law firms, but not always. And you get
paid for it. You get paid for it. More importantly, you get paid.
I say work experience, but it's work, but where you're also learning. And the idea is you get experience of different areas. So you were talking about doing intellectual property at the start, and then also you did this kind of disputes resolution. So you get to try all these different things. And I think one of the benefits of doing that is that you do get lots of, you know, even if you don't end up being someone who does lots of drafting, or as in just writing legal documents day in, day out, you still will have had that experience and you will have learned those skills. And so it might come up later in your career, and it's great that you can call back to it. I'm just going to move on because we have so many people to talk to in so little time. And we were talking about in-house practice, which is the way we describe lawyers who work in a company as opposed to in a law firm, or as a barrister in what's called chambers, like a group of barristers. And we have another lovely in-house lawyer on this call, who is Carrie, because as we said, she works at the Mercedes Formula One team, which is obviously very exciting and very cool. And it would, be great to hear, how did you find out about the job at Mercedes? How did you end up there, and what's your experience been like?
Yeah, so it's a little bit, I definitely didn't set out on a career in Formula One. In fact, when I was growing up, my only experience of Formula One was we had 4 channels on the TV in the house, and my mum used to watch it on a Sunday, and I would hear it and think, my goodness, it's that again. But my roots, I went to university in Newcastle, studied law. I decided I wanted the elusive training contract that everyone that you've just spoken about and described so eloquently. So I moved down south to London on a search of my training contract, and I went to a massive law firm called Dentons, and I couldn't get a training contract. I couldn't even get a paralegal role. I actually ended up in their post room. So yeah, a little bit of I graduated from law school and went into the post room of a law firm. But anyhow, I kept badgering them to give me a paralegal job. Eventually they did. So I did that for 2 years. And during that 2 years, I was constantly applying for training contracts. And I have many, many rejections because I didn't get any of them. So I decided I would take a little backward step in my career. I took an internship at Mercedes-Benz road cars. So nothing to do with Formula One. Which was fun, really good, loved in-house, thought, okay, this is definitely for me. Couldn't even drive a car when I went there, but managed to pass my driving test when I got there. But anyhow, so I was supposed to go there for 1 year and then go back and do my training contract at Dentons. And just as I was about to go back, the Formula One team said, do you want to come over and have a little look around? So I did. I come over, had a little look around, and they actually said, oh, do you fancy joining us for 6 months? And I said, I really want the training contract. Really want it. And my boss, or the person who subsequently became my boss, said, well, come join us for 6 months. If you like us and we like you, then we'll actually register as a training centre. You can do your training contract here. So there was no other Formula One teams at the time registered to take on trainees. So after 6 months, we set it up. We become a training centre. I did my training contract here. I qualified, and then I basically I've been here for 10 years now, and I worked my way basically from a legal assistant to legal director. So I now lead the team. So it's quite good fun. And during that time, we've got 8 championships. So training contract and 8 championships, I think.
Not bad. And in terms of, training in-house, I think it's more common than people realize, but it's still not something that's advertised a lot. What was it like? Did you think there were kind of advantages to it?
Yeah. So I think if I look at the composition of our team now, half of us have trained in-house, half of us have trained at law firms. And I think there are definitely real pros to training at a law firm. There are definitely some amazing technical skills that you learn when you're at a law firm that you might not necessarily get in-house. But then as Shane kind of went through, that exposure to commercial topics and risk is also really important. So I think if there's no right or wrong way to do it, and sometimes I think it comes down to maybe what suits you as a person and your personality, or just opportunity, really.
Yeah. No, I know what you mean. I think, like you, I was one of those people that did not find it easy to get a training contract.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's hard to know why. Sometimes you get good feedback, sometimes you get none, and you don't really understand. And I look back now and I wonder if it's just that I was applying to places that weren't the right fit, and that actually once I found the right place, it worked and it made much more sense. And I think maybe some truth in that. You find the opportunity that's meant to be.
Yeah, I think it's just keep an open mind and, get as much experience as possible. It's really difficult also to get work experience. I find that, as a girl from Northern Ireland with nobody in my world went into a law career, and no one in my family played golf. So there's no lawyers to, at that time to try and get work experience. So I think it's much better now. But I think, it hasn't always been straightforward. But I think if you can get that experience, then, you can figure out both worlds. Yeah.
And your post-room example is a great way of, showing how you need some kind of like tenacity sometimes to get these jobs. You need to just keep asking. And sometimes that works. I know one summer just emailed every law firm in Belfast nearly and said, look, I'll just come and work for free doing anything. And it eventually worked. Someone said, oh, someone's dropped off our vacation scheme. They've broken their leg. Yeah, why not come? Not always going to work, but if you send 100 emails, maybe one of them will come back. So
determination.
I think I'd agree with that. I think that's a really good important quality when you're starting out. And just turning to Ross, because we're talking about training and we're talking about in-house training, but you trained at a law firm, which is obviously the more kind of traditional route, a bit like Shane, doing a training contract, but you did that in Dublin, isn't that right?
I did, yeah. So a little like Shane, I studied something else. I think, as you mentioned at the top, so I did history and politics in Trinity in Dublin, where I'm from as well. And really it was kind of a case of I came out of school kind of 2007, everything's still roaring along, and we were kind of very much told you can do anything, so pick something that you'll enjoy in university and you can figure out a job after. And coming out of college then slightly later, things weren't as rosy. That felt like not the best advice, but I think overall I'd certainly say no real regrets with it. And I think for anyone kind of on this call who's done something else or has done law, I mean, you can change into multiple careers after. Law was kind of something that I had thought about. I did work experience in school and as solicitors, wasn't totally kind of sure on it. So I said, went off, did history and politics. And then after graduating, I worked in Leinster House for just under a year. I worked for a senator there, kind of just as a political assistant, which was enormously interesting and kind of just a great experience to have. But it was one that I was kind of thinking, right, if I want to do something else, or if I want to stay in politics, I'd like to kind of have a bit of a skill set I can offer, because you could see people who were accountants or had something else who they're able to bring that skill set. So I applied for an internship in Arthur Cox, which is one of the big law firms in Dublin.
Yeah.
And was lucky enough to get that. And so did that in 2013. And I think they still do it. It was a 4-week internship. And at the end of it then, they made offers to a number of us who were there. And so effectively, that's how I got my training contract. And I think, as you say, there's no real rhyme or reason with training contracts a lot of the time. A lot of them will kind of look for kind of, they'll look for different things. And I've seen both in Dublin and in London as well, where some will kind of look for very detailed forms and there'll be a full day competency centre. And I don't mind admitting on this that one of the reasons I applied for Cox at the time was that they just wanted your CV and a brief letter, which made it a lot easier than when you're actually saying, okay, here's how I'll do it. And actually the firm I work at now, Slaughter is kind of basically the same as well. So times I think it can be complicated too much, but this is kind of one where they probably try and get in more people for interviews, and then you can see from that.
And I think actually the internship point, it's really timely because you just mentioned that vacation schemes as well, which is a similar thing. I don't know if that's specific to England and maybe Ireland, they're more likely to call it an internship, but that's a similar kind of route where law firms offer effectively like paid work experience that's usually 1 to 4 weeks long. And usually at the end of that, there's an opportunity to interview for a training contract. And actually, that's how I ended up with a training contract. And I think, like you with your internship, I think it's great for you because you get to know the firm and you get to learn what the work's like, but it's also a great way to impress in it if you're not, either if you just, feel like you're not sure how to do an application, or you just know you're really good, but you feel like you're not coming across on paper. Vacation schemes, internships are great ways because you can just show up and be enthusiastic. I don't know about you, but I remember just asking everyone for work all the time. And I think it helps because then they at least remember your face and you feel like you've actually had the chance to show them who you would be if you got the job. And so if you don't get it, at least, you had a really good chance.
Yeah, I absolutely think so. And I think, as you say, it kind of is really important for you to also figure out, is this somewhere I want to work? And certainly in my case, so not having a law degree and the graduate diploma in law that Shane was talking about, that's not really a thing in Dublin, way more of a thing in London. I was one of 2 in my intake of 32 who didn't have a law degree. So you had to do FE1s.
Oh, wow.
Which is quite difficult because, again, it's almost kind of like studying for the GDL exams without actually having, a huge amount of class contact. Like you can do effectively kind of evening grinds, but I would definitely say it's a hard slog, but absolutely doable. So I think for anyone who, again, if you're not going to do a law degree, it's still not a barrier to kind of doing it in Ireland without incurring the cost sometimes of a GDL. Some of the English firms will pay for your GDL, which is obviously great. But if you are doing it in Dublin, again, you can kind of do it for the price of the FE1 exams. And then, so I trained in Dublin. And one of the things when you're doing your training contract, again, in Dublin, the Law Society have a reciprocal deal with the Law Society in England and Wales. So you can take English land law, which is one of the subjects that I took as well. And what that means is when you qualify, you can register to also qualify in England and Wales as well. So again, it's probably for anyone this, great to train in London, but you can still come over having trained in Dublin as well. So if for reasons you're saying, you know what, I'm not ready to make the move, it certainly is one year where you can. So I was a year and a half qualified before I made the move over. I know people who've come across straight away immediately after qualifying, and I know people who've come across, 5 or 6 years down the line. But given the links between the two are so strong, it is definitely a kind of a well-trodden path.
That's really useful to know. And when you moved over to England, apart from the law being different, how did you find there were any differences in the in the work, in the firms, in what it was like to work in London versus Dublin?
I think one of the things that, given just kind of the scale, I suppose, and what would be a large dispute in Dublin, then you kind of get put something on in London that can be just, many times bigger. It's kind of just getting your head around that. There's also then kind of just small, you have your usual kind of, I think, slight cultural differences as well. And so chit chat, not as much of a thing over here, I think, as well. And actually, I work with some kind of Irish colleagues on a case as well that we do some strategy for. And one of the things they never get used to is you might. That I heard you might quite a lot in my training contract in Dublin of you might do this, and that wasn't an option.
Oh, I see.
Like get ahead and do it. But I definitely find things are maybe a bit more direct over here as well. But I think in terms of the actual substantive law, I mean, you can pick it up quite quickly if you train, given it's the commonalities are very much there.
Yeah, and I guess the core skills as well are ultimately
exactly.
Same. I know lawyers who trained in New Zealand, for instance, and they're, you know, when we work together, you wouldn't even know, apart from the accent, because they have the exact same skills. They know how to look at a contract, they know how to write a very direct email. You know, they know how to do all these things because ultimately it's the same set of skills wherever you are.
I think the one brief point I would make is that, because actually, just in terms of thinking difference as well, and again for anyone who kind of, if you're thinking of applying, one of the things I had, because I didn't have a law degree and was applying to firms in Dublin, so where most people do, and it was kind of looking at what else you're bringing. So co-curricular stuff is obviously hugely important, and that can often be the VAC schemes, as you said, or internships, but also having a part-time job and things like that, where you can say, actually, you know what, so much of this is just getting on and being able to kind of get on and work with people. And I certainly know from people who've applied, who I've spoken to, who've applied to firms in London directly from Dublin, that comes up because it's a bit more unusual over here sometimes. And again, if you can make an interesting story out of it, I think that can sometimes make you stand out too as well. So definitely.
That's such a good word. That's something that's some advice I was given that I try and remember when I'm applying for jobs now. It's all about telling a story about why you want to do, and it shows, you know, you don't have to have the same experience as another applicant, but you do have to show that you have a coherent story that shows why you want the job and why you'd be good at it. And as you say, there are lots of ways to show that you have those skills, those like interpersonal skills that are really important. The kind of work ethic is really important. And the interest as well. So anyone joining this right now, I hope you'll be able to talk about this if you do go on to apply to things, because it shows you're really interested in the law and you're thinking about it at an early stage. And I certainly know if I was going back and I was joining something like this, I'd be writing about it on every application I could, because, you know, you want to be able to show that story of your interest and your relevance for the role. While we're talking about, because you're a litigator, Ross, I think we've got quite a few on this call. And just to explain, because that is not what I do, there are many divides in sort of legal practice. And one of them is quite often whether someone works in a litigation setting or a non-litigation setting. And litigation is just a fancy word for a dispute, an argument. So it can either be in a court or in a tribunal or alternative dispute resolution, which is like a slightly less formal metric for that. And then there are lawyers who don't do that, which is people like me. And we do advice and contracts, and I'm sure there are other things that I've forgotten that I do, but we basically don't do that. We prepare people to not go to court, and other lawyers deal with the people when they are already going to court or having problems. And that's quite often a divide. Equally, some lawyers do a bit of both. I think that's something that in-house lawyers quite often you get, especially the more senior you are, you have no choice, I think, but to deal with a little bit of both. But fortunately, we've got a range on our panel today, as always, and someone who's quite new to litigation is Úna, because you're obviously in a criminal litigation role at the minute. It'd be great to hear about that, but also I really want to talk about your apprentice scheme, because that's a totally new route to becoming a qualified solicitor that certainly I don't know very much about, but I'd love to hear about it.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Evan. So when I was in school, I was just looking for legal experience, so as to apply to university and do the full, like the traditional route of getting a degree and trying to get TC and all the rest of it, but could not get anything to write down on a personal statement in terms of work experience or legal just exposure. And then there was a competition that was circulated by my careers teacher from Kingsley Napley that offered a solicitor apprenticeship. I undertook it not with any intention of becoming an apprentice, but simply just to have something to write down on a form. And a year later, myself and my teammate, we ended up winning it, and were offered positions to work in London, which was like very unexpected and not not a route that I'd actually known anything about. But effectively what the apprenticeship allows is for people from school to go straight into law or corporate practice without a legal background or without any sort of like university degree. When I applied, I literally just had my GCSEs. And from that, it basically is a 6-year course, which at the end you will be a qualified solicitor without having to procure a training contract or do an LPC or any of those things. So effectively, I work 4 days in Cayenne as sort of like a paralegal or a trainee, doing sort of like the legal stuff, and then 1 day a week I attend university. So I'm getting my degree alongside. When I joined Cayenne, I worked in the real estate team for 2 years.
Yeah.
Which was very non-contentious and very transactional and not litigious in the slightest. It was very much buying and selling properties, grants and leases, doing tax bits and bobs. And yeah, that is kind of long and short of that. But with the apprenticeship, yeah, it really cool. Although with the apprenticeship, it does allow for the opportunity to move around the firm and get exposure to both contentious and non-contentious practice. So for the past year, I have been in the criminal department, working mainly on general crime, but also some white collar and extradition. Yeah. So
and how do you find the differences between the two? Do you have a preference? Or do you think that will come in time? You're going to carry on and do a whole load of other things, and then maybe later you'll decide?
I think definitely I'm more of a non-contentious person. Thought of arguments sometimes just unnecessarily stressful, but I do think it's very there's a lot of merit in getting exposure and practice of both, just to see what suits your personality and your work style, and just figure out what sort of work you like.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And sometimes you have to see what you don't like to know you don't like it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I did a few seats that I did not enjoy, but I still think I probably almost learned more from them in some ways than the ones that I really enjoyed. And if you're doing this for 6 years, do you do more what we call seats? Do you do more kind of departments than you normally would if you did a training contract?
Yeah, so it does vary from firm to firm, but the way Cayenne do it is you spend 2 years non-contentious, so in real estate, and then 2 years contentious in crime, and then the last 2 years they sort of mirror it to a traditional training contract whereby you do 4 different seats for 6 months each. So by the end of it you should have practical experience in 6 different areas of law, from which point you can then go for NQ applications.
And how have you found balancing that with the studying? Because I know you say it's 4 days and then 1, but I'm sure when you're not at college, you still have work to do, presumably.
Yeah, it can be very busy, but I just think it's part and parcel of the program. And if I can look at my friends who are doing law at normal universities, they're similarly busy, just with different different competing things to do. So I don't really think that the busyness or sort of stress or doing this sort of alternate route is really that different from a normal university.
No, that makes sense. I did when I did my LPC, the legal practice course bit, I worked while I did that, and I actually I think it made me manage my time better because you had no choice. And actually then and then when I stopped studying, when I'd finished it, I was like, why am I now so stressed? Have more time. But I think you adapt, as you say, and you make it work. Given that this is a route you start out, when you finish school, essentially, is there any advice you have for anyone on the talk today who's thinking about it?
Yeah, I think absolutely it is a great way to get into law without having any sort of experience or education or network. I mean, I never even thought about moving to England before, or
Yeah.
nor did I know anyone over here when I started Ken. But it really does allow like practical experience from the start as opposed to just like working through uni and then going through the quite onerous process, it seems, of getting TCs or doing the SQE. So absolutely, like there's a space for everyone who wants to do an apprenticeship, and it's a lot more accessible than um other more traditional routes. So
Yeah. I mean, presumably you get paid for the working time that you do, which is obviously a great
yeah,
help for a lot of people who think, university is wildly expensive these
yeah,
days. The legal practice course is expensive. It's all tricky. So it's great that there's a route that allows you to be earning while you do
yeah,
that. And have you
absolutely.
found London life to be okay? Have you adapted things? Are you going to start
Uh,
speaking in a London accent? No, I don't think any of us
I
will.
really hope not. I think I would be subject to a lot of abuse from my friends back
I know
home.
the feeling.
But no, London is very different. I'm from quite a remote wee place in the countryside.
Yeah.
But it's a great place to be and a great place to work. And there are so many Irish people here that you really don't have to look too far to find someone close to home. So yeah, it's well worth the move.
Great. Oh, thank you so much. That's really, really helpful. Right, I think time to move on. So we talked to one last solicitor. So Kerri, um, you are also working kind of as a solicitor in criminal practice. So you specialize in white collar crime, but you've done quite a number of things before that. And it'd be really great if you could talk us through them.
Yeah, I spent quite a lot of time putting this together this morning, trying to remember all of the things I've done, and it took me a while. So
That's
I
the
went
sign of
straight
a
to
good career, I
university.
think.
Is it?
Yeah.
I went straight to uni. I did a law degree. I was all set to do the straightforward route.
Mhm.
I originally thought I wanted to go to the bar,
Okay.
and then I realized, certainly in Ireland, and this is something that other panelists have mentioned, I don't have any family in the law. I don't play golf. So I became pretty convinced that the Irish bar was not going to be the way for me.
Yeah.
And I think coming from a small town, not having anyone in the law, I really didn't know what was going to be involved in
Yeah.
actually qualifying, getting a job. And I was having too much fun at university to really work it out.
Yeah.
So it got to sort of third, fourth year, and my friends were applying for training contracts or doing the kind of internship that Ross had done. And I just really hadn't done any of that. So I, in the absence of anything else to do, really went off and did a master's degree in London. So that was the first time I lived in London. And I spent a year here at that point. And when I started to think seriously about what I actually wanted to do, I had done a J1 visa, which is a working visa in America
Yeah.
in the summer between third and fourth year of uni. And I had done that in California. I'd spent some time in San Francisco and I really liked it. So I decided I'd really like to go and work there. And we're all lucky enough that America has a somewhat similar legal system to the UK and Ireland. And if you've done particular subjects at law school or on the GLD, you can just do the exam to qualify as an attorney in New York. You don't have to have gone to law school in America.
Really?
So, as with many immigrants, my gateway into America was going to be through New York. So I sat the New York exam, and the following year I sat the California exam. And I was all on track, except that year, because of the tech bubble, all of the visas, because you need a visa to work in America if you're not a citizen, all of the visas were oversubscribed for the first time in about 20 years. So that was a bit of a setback. And I came back home and I reevaluated a little bit, but America was still the goal. So I took what was a 9-month job working for the Irish Department of Justice. So I was maybe around the same time, actually, spending a bit of time in the Irish Parliament as Ross, sitting behind the minister while legislation went through and speaking to the Attorney General's office about the drafting of the legislation. So I've seen how the sausage is made, is the term.
Yeah.
And that made me realize that I wouldn't actually want to do that kind of work.
Yeah. You need to see
So,
it.
exactly. So that sort of turned into being in Dublin, meeting someone, and my plan then shifting again. So I stayed in Dublin. I worked for a statutory body called the Law Reform Commission, and I did some work on the law of evidence. So that related to both civil and criminal evidence and how you put evidence forward in court.
Yeah.
And when that was finished, my then boyfriend and I decided we would move to London.
Okay.
At that point, I had quite a lot of experience in how criminal law was made, if not how it was practiced. So the first job I got when I moved here was as a researcher for someone who used to be described in the media here as the doyen of white collar crime.
Wow.
So for anyone on the call who doesn't know what doyen means, that is the most well-respected and prominent person in an area. So he was the person who really developed the area of white collar crime in this country. And I worked for him for about 2 years. And then when he decided he was going to retire, that's when I set the transfer test to qualify as a solicitor here.
Right. Okay.
So using my American qualifications, I was able to sit the exams here and then go on the roll of solicitors. My understanding is that the SQE, which is the new way of qualifying, quite closely reflects the way the QLTS, the Qualified Transfer Test, used to work. It's no fun, but if I'm capable of doing it, anyone is. And my slightly roundabout way of getting qualified, I think, means that I can speak to lots of different things. And I didn't have to go through the training contract process.
Well, exactly. I think the theme of this talk could be there's pros and cons to everything, is basically what we're saying. I guess it probably is useful to tell people about the new qualifying route, which maybe we are not the best people to tell you about because it's not how any of us are qualifying. But I think it's intended to be a replacement for the kind of training contract legal practice course route. And it involves the SQE, which is the solicitor's qualifying exam. So again, another exam that you will have to study for. So not so different to the legal practice course. But then afterwards, instead of training contract, it's called, I think, qualifying work experience. And the idea is to make it a bit more flexible. I imagine it will not be too dissimilar to some of the things we've talked about today. But all the acronyms have changed. So if you do go on to apply and you think, they told me it was going to be LPC and GDL and BPTC, and I don't see any of those letters here, that's because it has changed. But ultimately, all routes lead to qualifications. So it's likely to be very similar to the experiences we've talked about. But just going back to Kerri, because criminal is, I think when you're a lawyer in London, quite often it can feel like every single solicitor in London is a commercial solicitor. The big law firms tend to focus around that kind of work. So it's supporting companies to restructure, buy things, sell things, do business, and fight with people. But actually, there's a whole other world to law, and criminal is one other practice area that's obviously really important and in the news quite a lot. You have so much experience, but what first drew you to criminal as an area?
I originally wanted to be a commercial lawyer.
Okay.
That's what my master's degree is in. I thought that would be the sensible thing to do, and I would go and work for a big firm and I would make loads of money. And here I am. But once I started doing criminal law, and I think I'm very lucky in that my firm does really very niche work, really very high-end, high-profile work.
Yeah.
And it's privately paid. So there's a distinction, doesn't really exist so much in Ireland, between legally aided criminal work and privately paid criminal work. And whilst Úna's firm actually does some legally aided criminal work, my firm doesn't. And that means that I work largely either for companies or for executives of companies, and the companies will be paying for their representation.
Yeah.
Or for what's known as ultra high net worth individuals, so millionaires and billionaires. And that's a bit of a different world to someone who might be dealing drugs or is involved in sort of physical violent crime.
Yeah.
It will be people who are involved in financial crime, money laundering, tax evasion, and in relation to the super yacht, people who are sanctioned.
That makes sense. And do you think, are there like particular skills and qualities that are specific to your kind of work that are different from if you had gone down the commercial route?
Yeah, I think as Úna says, there's a willingness to fight.
Yeah.
There's enjoying an argument. And I can see Will, having been at the bar, nodding and laughing here.
Yeah, well,
and I think Will is probably a good person to pick that up with.
Absolutely. Do you agree? Do you think, well, I mean, as a barrister, I think that this is a good point to talk about that, because quite often that is the distinction, that barristers are at the very forefront of the fight, of the argument.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, there are different species even within the barristers world. So you still have barristers who actually spend a lot of time in cold, drafty but beautiful places, and do a lot of written work and actually don't go to the coal face very much. But certainly, if you're a criminal barrister, the expectation is very much so when you first start out that you'll be in court every day. Often, when you first start out, representing multiple clients sometimes in different courts, and doing a lot of fighting on behalf of your clients when you start out, for sure.
And what made you decide to become a barrister?
Probably because I was really arrogant when I was younger and loved the sound of my voice, and I was kind of drawn to it. I mean, I joke on that front, but I think I did always enjoy being on my feet.
Yeah.
So, and what I mean by that is, when I was at school, I always enjoyed, for example, debating. I always enjoyed drama, or being on the stage, things like that. And I think that sounds like it's kind of a squirming thing to say yourself, but I think in reality, if you enjoy doing that sort of thing, then the bar in particular, an area of the bar that has you on your feet a lot, is for you. But then, as you kind of get through life, your priorities change, things you're interested in change.
Yeah.
And so that's why, for example, I'm now actually in a law firm doing very similar work to Kerri. So I started out, 10 years ago with the burning fire of wearing a wig and gown and wanting to shout in court on behalf of people to juries. And then over time kind of developed an interest in financial crime, doing more corporate work. Maybe some more kind of bigger kind of difficult academic concepts within criminal law to grapple with that are more common in this type of work rather than in general crime work, and sort of moved to doing this sort of thing a bit more. But I still have my rights of audience if anyone wants me to go shout for them.
It's funny that you say that. I know you started that out as a joke, the being on your feet and things, but actually it chimes well with, I did like work experience when I was at school with a barrister, and I remember him saying to me, the difference between a barrister and a solicitor is a solicitor thinks before they speak and a barrister thinks as they speak. And I knew straight away that I was definitely someone who needs to take some time and collect my thoughts and maybe write them down first. And so the barrister route was not for me, but some people really thrive off that kind of, energy that you get from thinking like that.
I think it is important to say, though, two things. One is that it doesn't mean that you aren't still incredibly nervous before you stand up and say anything. I can recall very fondly, you might not think fondly, but probably quite a funny anecdote for some of the people on this call, that one of my supervisors, when I was doing pupillage, which is what a training contract is called at the bar, and he said that still every first day of a trial in the Crown Court in front of a jury, before he knew that the jury was going to be sworn and he would be kind of knowing what he was going to do, he was sick in the gents every single trial because he had such bad nerves.
Wow.
But then once you know the trial starting, you're on your feet and you open your mouth, then when you do that you're kind of where you're meant to be, that's when you kind of feel like you're doing the sort of job that you're meant to be doing. But it's very, very difficult. And the second thing was just to emphasize that it's not the only route to actually being an advocate in court. So there is now, and a lot of solicitors have this qualification, something called the higher rights qualification, which means that solicitors can also appear in the Crown Court and the High Court.
Yeah, and also, as you say, some barristers do much more kind of advisory work. They're giving opinions on things.
Those are the stereotypes for sure, but
there's actually a lot of flex.
Yeah.
And taking you back in time on a journey, when you were finishing school, did you study law at university? Did you think then this is what I want to do, or did it take you some time?
So I studied law, so I had a similar experience to a lot of people here. So I grew up in a council estate in Bangor, had no one in my family who went to university, let alone studied law.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't play golf.
Golf is getting a lot of airtime on this.
Yeah, I felt like it shouldn't, but I think anyone from the island of Ireland needs to call out these ridiculous practices. But so I actually did do work experience in the glamorous location of Newton Ards when I was about 15 or 16, and was taken to the High Court by a solicitor there because I told her I was interested in being a barrister. And I met some of the barristers there, and I just felt like I could see, it seemed to me like kind of how they got on, and I couldn't see how I could easily do that in Belfast. So I came to London because I read a lot about the chamber structure. So there's a difference between being a barrister in Belfast and Dublin, where you're on your own, you're not part of an entity. Whereas in London, typically you're part of an entity called the chambers, where a lot of barristers get together, they have administrative support, they pay in percentage of their earnings into that administrative structure, and as in return they get a lot of assistance administratively, but also a lot of support for very junior people. So they pay a salary to you when you're starting out, whereas once you're out of your kind of first year, your first 18 months, then you're literally earning what you can bring in. So it's a bit of a cliff edge.
Yeah, and that's actually, we've got a question in about studying in London. I guess the same thing is relevant for the early stages of your career in London. It can be quite expensive. It's not, I think we all who've lived there know it's an expensive place, and frankly, England comparative to Northern Ireland and the south of Ireland, maybe not including Dublin, it tends to be more expensive in general. But there is support available through things like chambers, right? There are scholarships. There are
the Inns of Court, yeah.
Yeah.
So for the bar anyway, they have. I was very lucky to get a scholarship from my Inn of Court and also from my bar course provider. So there is a lot of funding for doing the bar from those entities. But I mean, that's because in the solicitors side of the profession, often firms will help you to pay for your course. I think that's right anyway. Other people can tell me to shut up if I'm wrong, but
no, that's absolutely right. If you get a training contract with a law firm before you have started your conversion or your LPC, then they will usually, but not always, pay for that studying. And then quite often as well, they will give you some money to live, basically, so that you can afford to study while you do that. But there are also some ways to do those courses while working. So like I said, I did the LPC while working full time. I did it 2 or 3 evenings a week for 18 months, I think. And that meant that I could, have a normal salary and also study at the same time. So there's lots of different ways to do it. And I guess Úna's way is another way as well, where you can work 4 days a week and therefore be paid for that. So I think if that's a concern for people, I just suggest like doing research. There are plenty of different routes depending on exactly what you want to do. But there's always options, and also there are plenty of organizations that can help. So you can reach out to, if you are starting the legal practice course in the GDL, you can reach out to the course provider. They quite often give really good advice on these things. And sorry, as Shane says, some firms pay after the fact, so you might have to work out your funding before, but they'll pay it back.
And just one thing, I think that is a distinction against Dublin, where generally you only get paid when you start your training contract. So sometimes you'll get money back for your FE1s. But another thing actually to bear in mind, because I think it certainly is worth exploring all options, but you can do your GDL and your LPC outside of London. So there are places like people I know have done it in Oxford or in Nottingham, or kind of, I think there's a couple around. So you kind of might be able to avoid the cost of living in London, which can be particularly expensive, and there's ways and means doing that. Whereas it's only training in Dublin, in Ireland, in the Republic at least. So that can add up quite a lot in terms of cost, particularly if you might get a smaller practice and someone won't actually pay you during training contract all the time as well. So it is definitely worth trying to see all options, and sometimes kind of just trying to look for where there are scholarships and where there's funding available. And regrettably, it does tend to be more in the UK than it does in Ireland.
That's really helpful, because that's not something I have experience of, but I think generally the advice is shop around, look around, do as much research as you can. We've got another question, which is, were there any moments when you thought law might not be for me? And if so, what motivated you? I'm really interested by this, because I feel like we've all had such different journeys. Does anyone want to chime in on that?
I think there are probably moments where in every career you probably think that it's maybe not for you. But yeah, certainly for me, probably once a year. And then something quickly turns around and happens, and it very quickly changes again. So
I think sometimes as well the application process can be tough, and sometimes if you get, it's very competitive. We're not going to lie to you, and so most people will be rejected by at least one place they apply to. Some people will be rejected a lot. I was in the latter group, and it doesn't feel great. And I think what is really lovely about this panel and the stories we've just heard is that everyone's shown a real dedication, but also a real flexibility. So like Kerry's story of, going to the US, doing all sorts of different things, and not being just having a narrow view of what a legal career looks like, I think is helpful in that. If you aren't too set on one very specific thing, then there's space.
There's just an anecdote which I'd like to share on that, which is that if you do work experience at a law firm or with a barrister and you find it really exciting because you're interested in that aspect of it, as in practically working in law, and then you start to study law and you find that it's actually quite different. It is very different, and the academic study of law is totally different to the practical application of it. And I actually hated studying my law degree in terms of the subject matter, but actually when I came to do the bar course and pupillage, I absolutely loved it and loved the law. So I just think it can kind of depend what you're doing as well. If you're studying it academically as opposed to actually, applying it to try and help people and try and find creative ways using the law to help people.
That's a really good point. It is completely different. I know people who studied law who love the study, and then found the practice was not for them at all. And I know people who didn't study it who then realized, actually, I'm really well suited to it, and everything in between. And then the other side of that is that you might really like one type of law, or you might, but not another. You know, when I trained in a law firm, I didn't enjoy every single team that I sat in. Some days I thought, you know what, I can't look at another lease. This isn't for me. And then you'd move on to something else and you'd really enjoy that and remember, okay, it's fine. There are a million ways to be a lawyer, and that one just wasn't for me. But that doesn't mean that the whole thing isn't for me. That is actually our time, but I just want to say a huge thank you to our panel. You've all been fantastic, so interesting, so helpful. I feel like I've learned a lot, so I hope all our attendees have as well. Thank you all for joining as well. As I said, this is the second talk in our programme. There will be other talks later on, and we also have a full programme with workshops, a solicitor competition and a mooting competition. So if you find this interesting, or if you have a friend who you think might find this interesting, please let them know. I think sign-ups for workshops might be this week. So if you are interested, please speak to your schools as soon as possible, or if you're a university volunteer, to your university. But yes, if you don't quite make it by Friday, just do it as soon as you can, and we'll see what we can do. But really appreciate all of your time, and thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.